not only Sydney but Australia's first articulate user group meeting. The thing with these kind of meetings is that it's just not really, I guess, training as such. It's just users coming together and just showing and sharing what they know, and that's, I think, one of the great strengths that you're probably aware of the articulate community is that they're very generous, and people are more than happy to share their knowledge and their experience. What I wanted to show is these are sort of just some. I mean, as you probably know, when you're developing content, time is always of the essence, and you never seem to have enough of it. So I guess if you can always find a way to save some time, it's always a good thing. So I got a couple of things that I've kind of discovered along the way. Chances are I've probably copied this off somebody. I think Ruth's told me a fair few things. So yeah, they're not all necessarily my ideas, but I'm going to claim them tonight. Just while that's loading up, out of interest, who here uses Studio to develop? Yeah. What about Storyline? Who's still on Storyline 1? Okay, that's okay. And 2? Okay, cool, okay. So, what I wanted to talk about first, I guess first kind of little tip is using master slides. Does anybody use master slides in their content development? Yeah. I guess this is something that you could use in Studio or Storyline, I mean PowerPoint for that matter. But I find that they're a real good time-saving thing to use because I only have to sort of set up my templates in that once, and then I could just insert all the slides as I need to use them. So I guess you really need to know what your layout and what your look and feel is going to be from the beginning, rather than sort of getting halfway through and then working it out. But if you do know, and if you do have consistent elements that are going to appear from screen to screen, master slides are a really good way to set everything up consistently. And they do actually, I guess, minimise the size of your project a little bit too. So to set them up, you just go to the View tab, and then we'll go to Slide Master. Okay, so what this brings up is we've got like this top one is like a master of master slides, and then we have several layout slides underneath. And this top slide, anything that appears on this particular slide, we can apply it to, it will apply to all of the layout slides as well. So I've put a couple of images off to the side just so that I didn't have to go searching for them, but if I put, say, a logo on here, if you can sort of see, it's a little bit small, but down on all of the layout slides, the logo's appearing there as well. You could also, you could put some navigation on your master slides. So I've just made a couple of sort of forward and next buttons. So you can put them on there as well, because you can put triggers and you can put layers on master slides as well, and use them. And again, it just saves you setting it up on every single time on every single slide. So you can see here that the two arrows, the forward and backwards, have been applied to all of the layouts as well. So whenever I go to choose a layout, those elements will be on the screen. These other slides, if you apply anything to these layout slides, it only applies to that slide. So if we had, say, this one, and if I had some text, or an object, an image, anything, it's only appearing on that slide. The other slides have still been left blank. So we've got that. Yep, okay. You can insert more master slides if you wanted to have, because you could have multiple master slides. So you might have a couple of consistent layouts. It might not just be one throughout your whole project. So you can either insert a whole master slide with a number of layout slides up here, or you can just insert a layout slide to the end, and then you can format that and customise that, and you have multiple layout slides. Another thing I like to do when I'm in here is setting up. You can set up your colour and your font themes, because again, it's applying that to the whole project. To do that, and you can do your colour and font themes from in the design tab as well, but if you do them in here, then you know that's all done and done across the board. So with the colour themes, these ones at the top here are ones that, this is Ben's computer, so he's set up a few colour themes depending on the project. I guess a lot of the stuff, I mean, do the projects that you work on have certain colour guidelines and branding sometimes? Sometimes, yeah. In cases where it has to be a specific, you know, it might have to be a specific shade of red or green or whatever the colour theme is for that particular project, you can actually set them up in here by creating some new theme colours. And we've got all of the sort of options that we can change. So now, what I did was in here, I've just created a little bit of text just to say that because when you look at your colour themes, you've got, you know, accent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, those kinds of things, control 1, custom 1, what all those things mean. So there's a link, and I'll post it out afterwards from the Articulate website, from the eLearning Heroes website, that tells you what the breakdown of what all those things mean. But the main ones are like accent 1 is the default colour for shapes and captions and things like that. Control 1 is the hover colour. You can custom 1 is the default fill colour for buttons. So you can set all those things. So rather than that default blue that always, whenever you create a new button, if you haven't set a colour theme, you can change that so it's the bright red or whatever you need straight away. So you can sort of save yourself a little bit of time there.
So what I'm going to, I suppose, just quickly show you is, just because it comes up sometimes in storyline training, is the power of variables. And it's also sort of, it's like, we get a lot of questions, yeah, that's great, but when could I use it? Give me a real life example. And I suppose looking at customizing content with variables, and I suppose, how many people here use variables quite often in storyline? So a few. Yeah, they're pretty scary things. They're pretty good. And with variables, I suppose, it's a great way to think of them like assistants in a course. Like an assistant keeps track of your, you know, data, like a personal assistant. You could nearly see variables as an assistant in the course, that they keep track of your information, and that you could then recall or use that information at any time. It's also really a way to store information in a course, so you can look at it that way. And it's really with using variables, if you haven't used them before, it really gives you power. The power. And it gives you more power in your courses to do more things really, and to take it to another level. So I suppose what I'm going to show today is the way that a variable could be used to either customize. What I'm showing you today could be, you could use it to choose a character to appear. So, you know, if you have, like building like a game and a person wants to choose a different character, you could do what I'm doing today. Or another interesting one is, some people don't like listening to audio in courses, but you still need to give the option. And could you have two options where if they didn't choose the audio, maybe another layer appears explaining, so they get a different user experience. And again, you could sort of do that with what I'm showing. But I'm going to show you how to customize certain content to appear for certain users using variables. So it sort of came up in storyline training a few times with questions from people. What if I had one course, but there was maybe two groups of people that were viewing that one course, and I wanted certain people to see some information and other people to see other information, but that information would appear on maybe one slide. I'm not going building different scenes, that they'd see maybe different layers or different pieces of information. And you might have maybe middle management and just general employees. Now that's fine, because you could select a button and it could just jump to a slide, but also how do you lock it down? Like, how could you set it up with passwords, that only managers have certain passwords and employees have certain passwords? So it really sort of really customizes the experience. And again, what I'm showing could be applied to a lot of other different things. So I'll just give you, I suppose, a little demo of what I'm doing. that this child, her first words are going to be trigger, layer, date, variable. It's a little bit of a worry, but she might be a storyline trainer. We're training her up. So I suppose this is the example I have, and there's true or false variables in it, and let's say it's like a code of conduct, or a course that maybe a few different groups are doing. So that was sort of, I've just taken it pretty basically. So whether I choose manager or employee, let's say I chose manager, a layer appears. Now, because sometimes with people, you'll always have people who, even if they're not in that role, will see if they're missing out and just want to try it out. So in this case, let's say, looks like you've selected the manager's option to continue into your special password. So I'm not too sure what my password is, I'll wing it.
For manager, it has to be password.
Say that again?
For manager, it has to be password.
It's close, you should really see what I have on this one. So let's say I entered the wrong one. It doesn't let me move forward. So there's actually a variable in there that I have to match it to that exact value before I can move on. So let's say I was being a bit cheeky, I'm not a manager, I have to go back. And it's also looking, that go back button really resets the slide. And there's an extra trigger in there to reset the variable, because even if you go back and revisit a slide, it doesn't reset the variable. Because variables are a global element within a project. It's not like a trigger where it's just causing an action to happen on that slide. So I better know your place, Ruth, okay? And this time I'll type in my password, and sorry Shane, I was going to choose password, but it's just very simple. I kept it just simple. And now I can continue on. Now, this slide, they actually see, it's the one slide, welcome to the Code of Conduct for Employees. But if I went back and went back again and chose managers, think about that. Basically it brings them to the same slide, but I have a few little bits of information, just, layers only appearing if I'm a manager, or layers only appearing if I'm an employee. So again, could you customize content for different levels as well? Like maybe it's a game, or you're applying gamification, or there's challenges. There's easy and hard. And if they choose the hard option, they don't get as much extra information layers, but there might be a reward where they get to do the quiz quicker, or they get to finish the course quicker. So that sort of thing could still be applied. And I think it's always gone back. And again, Shane, I'm going to pick on you again, like your point about wasting people's time, like can you set this up so people don't have to go back and review stuff that they already know? And that's where true and false variables, they nearly personalize that experience. And then it'll bring me on to another slide where this actually goes to a particular scene that's only for managers, and then I could bring them back to the general sort of content as well. So I'll just got a few minutes and I'll break it down and show you how I put it together, just out of interest. It won't take too long. Anybody have any questions on that? Make sense? Very important company, just managers, employees, nobody gets a title. So this is sort of the nuts and bolts of it. I sort of have a starting scene. And on that starting scene, because I've sort of just broke it down, there's managers and employees. And basically, a layer will appear if they're a manager or if they're an employee. And I suppose I'm using the layer as well to give me more control that they have to type in a certain password. You might need to do that, but it could also be a bit fun as well with using passwords like that to unlock levels. You've finished level 1, you've got a password to unlock the second level. So you can really have a lot of fun with it. And then there's another layer that appears if they entered the wrong password. And then they get on to another slide here. And on this slide, again, there's only certain layers that appear if you're a manager or if you're an employee. And there's also text that appears. It's up here on the base slide. There's actually 2 pieces of text that could appear, and their initial state is hidden, and that will only appear if they're a manager or employee. So you bring states into it where the initial state of an object, let's say this object here, its initial state is hidden. Put that up there, that's all right. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to customize maybe a pathway for a while, and then employees should only go to the employees scene, and managers should only go to the managers scene. But again, this could apply to a lot of other things. So what I need to do, the biggest thing is creating variables. And for those of you who are not familiar with variables, they sit here in this little X where it says Manage Project Variables. And I can open it up, and I've got the variables already made. There's a true and false one for the manager or employee. And for those of you who are not familiar with true and false variables, it's nearly like flicking a switch off and on. At the moment, the switch is off if I'm an employee. If I choose employee, the switch goes on. Once that switch goes on, I can see all that information for an employee. You've also got text boxes, and this is where these are text variables, where you type in a password. Or another example would be if you get the users to type in their name at the start of the course, and it'll remember their name, which is quite a nice way as well to make things a bit more personal. For those of you who are using variables or starting to use variables, my advice is make sure you name them, because it just, nearly went into labour one day when I didn't name all my variables. But those are the type of things that make, having those good work practices as well, naming your variables. And variables are a global element. I can basically not have selected any slide, and I can still open up my variables. So you can pick them up at anywhere in the course. All right, so I've kind of set up everything. And what I really need to do is, I've done everything for the employee. I'm just going to show you the manager one. That when they tick the manager box, it basically changes that manager variable to true. So the trigger would be adjust the variable manager. And you can see the naming is important, to equal the value of true when the user clicks the manager tick box. Okay, so also just for those of you who are maybe even new to Storyline, naming things in the timeline also saves those, yeah, I see a few nods, yeah, we've all been there, yeah. So naming things so it just makes sense, because really with your triggers, what's happening is it's applying triggers, and you're really starting to read those triggers and become familiar with them. Even though you're not programming, you're still learning a basic programming language, so being able to read and identify things quickly, again, makes life easy. So once they've selected the manager, I need them to also be able to show that layer manager straight away. So what I'm going to do is create another trigger to show layer manager when the variable changes. And the variable that's changing is manager on condition that manager is equal to the value of true. So we'll only, if that variable is changing, it's only going to show me that particular layer. There's always a few different ways you could do it. You could even do it even if they just tick the box straight away. Once that box gets into a state, changes state. It depends how much control you want over this, and you'll always have a few users who will try and do things a little bit differently. So you're merely trying to always foresee.
We didn't really script this part. We're just going to wing it as we sort of went. So we sort of planned a little bit of what we were going to talk about, but when we rang you, we kind of thought we'll just kind of wing it, and you can talk about whatever you want, or anything you want to talk about, Dave?
Well, to be honest, it's a little intimidating. In these days, we never discussed variables in the first hour of any user group.
It's just how we roll.
We're not articulate, so I'd say everyone's in pretty good hands. But we're hopefully keep our fingers crossed and we can get out there later on.
So hi everyone, I'm Ben. Hey guys. I've been a storyline developer for the last 2 years. No, that's going to turn into an AA meeting. No, we're not going to go there. So, just a show of hands first. Hands up everyone who has hands. Seriously? Good, just making sure you're awake. Okay. Now more seriously, hands up who has used Storyline 2. Okay. Hands up who wants to use Storyline 2. Fantastic, that's what we want to see. Basically what I'm going to be showing you is Storyline 2. So I'm just going to start this off again because I had this amazing animation up front, which is words appearing one after the other. What we're looking at on the screen is basically the features of Storyline, minus one or two little bits and pieces. What you're actually looking at here in the background, these little aqua-esque words, they're the features that haven't really changed between 1 and 2. The green words, states, text editing, those sorts of things, those are features that have had a little bit of a tweak. Okay? The big purple words, those are the things that have really changed. Okay? Changes to Animation Painter, the dockable panels, because I'm not sure if you guys noticed when Ruth was doing her presentation, she was actually able to undock the triggers panel, which is fantastic. If you've got 2 monitors, all your trigger panels and layers and everything go on one monitor, you can actually focus on your slide a lot more on the other monitor. It gives you much more real estate to do those amazing design sort of things. Really cool. Auto recovery, they've done a little bit of work on as well, and that gets big words big thing in my regard on my screen, because I'm one of those people that forget to save. Okay, no matter how many times I tell people to do that in the Storyline training, I'm always the one that doesn't go Control S. So anyway, negative scoring, another huge one as well. So when you're doing your quizzes and everything now, you can be really cruel, and I can see a young man that's very happy over here. You can be amazingly cruel with your users or your students now, because you can actually give them negative scores based on their answers, which is great. Motion paths, which is one of the things we're going to look at. New languages that are included, so we've expanded their language pack that's available in there. Question import, so you can import questions now for your quizzes straight off the back of a Excel file. So as long as they're formatted in the right way, it just drags the entire quiz in off the back of Excel, and it's done, which is fantastic. Slider interactions, which has been mentioned a couple of times. And they've also upgraded and made some more triggers and doubled other different bits and pieces. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to focus on a couple of these in terms of a presentation, and then I'm actually going to show you the file that's sitting behind it so we can just pull apart what's happening with some of those different interactions. Like with the other guys, if you guys have any questions whatsoever, just yell out or throw something at me so you can get my attention. Otherwise, we'll kick on through. So, kind of knew that getting that out of the actual stand was going to be a bad idea. Here we go. So, what are we going to be looking at? So in this particular Storyline file, I'm going to be looking at 3 different things and 3 of the major new functions in there from mine. The slider interactions, we're going to have a look at motion paths as well, and then we're going to have a look at some of the different triggers that they've put in, which are slightly more subtle in some ways, but they're really fantastic, I think, because they can really change the way you design and work with your content. Starting with sliders though. So a slider is basically something that goes like that, and then it opens up. Okay, it allows you to do things. So off that slider, I'm just changing the screen from one to another. Here is a slider that I've built around blood alcohol concentration. This is something we're doing for New South Wales Health. And it's actually quite interesting to see. So this is where you have your blood alcohol. This is a timeline down the bottom which will sort of evolve as I slide along. That's 0.05. So if we go out drinking, okay, we're going to start out drinking at 7 p.m. and we're going to finish our drinking, I think, at about 11 p.m. Long, okay? Last drink at 11 p.m, our blood alcohol concentration is 0.15. Now, would anyone like to hazard a guess at what time of day we're going to be back down here again? No one? Anyone?
About 6, 7 o'clock.
6 or 7 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
Good luck. Okay, so last drink at 11 p.m, I can slide my slider along. Arrive at work at 9 a.m, I'm still up at here. Okay? At 11 a.m, in the morning, I'm back at 0.05. It's about 12 hours after my last drink. Okay? And then at 4 p.m, I'm back to 0. So it's basically what the slider is doing. It's allowing me to reveal and interact with this graphic in a whole different way. The original slide for this, I can tell you, was actually built as just a straight animation, where the narration or the voiceover would talk, and then those different things would appear as the narration is talking about it. But now what we can actually do is cut the narration up into certain sections and have the users go through that slider and unveil those different sections at a different time. Okay? That's quite cool. I enjoyed that. Different one. Left brain, right brain. So show of hands again. Put your right hand up with your left brain. Put your left hand up with your right brain. No? No takers? No brains. Okay, that's cool. Alright, so different type of slider here. So I've basically got the slider in the centre. I've got my left brain, right brain illustration here. If I slide to the right, I can see if I'm right brained. If I slide to the left, it reveals left brain. Scientific, artistic, scientific, artistic. Hours of fun. Okay? Yeah, you can definitely get a copy. So basically what's happening here, there's a number of different ways to do this, and I've fiddled around with a few different ways, but effectively what's happening here is we have that image in the background with the brain on the front, and there is a box, a white box sitting over the front of the image which has various states, and as I'm sliding the slider to the left or the right, it's changing the states of the white box. If I slow that right down, 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, 4 states. Okay? You could also do it with actually chopping up the image in the background, and I didn't have the time to do that, but you can actually take, because that is an Illustrator image, you can take it and actually have different elements appearing as you slide the slider along, which is quite cool. It just depends on how much time you have in a graphics engine to be able to do really cool things. When you speed it up a little bit though, awesome. So that's sliders, and we're going to come back and have a look at how they work in a little while. If I hit the next button, that's going to take me back to my little menu here. Next, we have the wonderful world of motion paths. So motion paths is basically allowing me to animate objects in my screen. And we have just a straight animation here where I've got these leaves over just a standard background image, and I'm letting them float down the screen. Okay? And they can move around, do different things, little motion path to slide in from the side. Gardens in autumn, a practical guide. That was done last autumn. Okay? So yeah, you can just grab items, and those ones just had freeform motion path set to them. And you can tell the items based on your slide timeline to start and end at different times, and you can speed up and slow down the motion paths as well. Next one, I quite like. It's a bit of fun. Billiards. Okay? Exactly the same thing, motion paths. Alright? What happens here though is that we have basically the motion paths occurring at different points along the timeline. And you can have, because the motion paths you can trigger, you can have one motion path trigger an X, so you can have a massive cascading effect. Now basically all I've had in that was the motion path, or the motion path of the cube, followed by the motion path of the white ball. Then all the red balls basically triggered as soon as the white ball got to that point. So it was just timed on their own individual item timelines. Then with the red balls, they just had slightly different speeds of animation and motion paths that bounced off the different items around the thing. When the ones that got to the holes got their change of state, because that was the end of their timeline. Okay, so you do some really fantastic things with motion paths along those lines. And lots of fun developing this sort of stuff and seeing the sort of things you can do with those type of interactions. Cool. Last but not least, the wonderful world of triggers. The Newton's cradle of storyline, action and reaction. Okay, so in the world of triggers, we have some new changes in there. Change the state of. Let's have a look at what we've got in here. So they've added basically some new triggers in here, so we can now move our objects around the screen. We can have a move trigger, move this object and move that object. We also have, which are really fantastic, a pause and a resume timeline triggers as well. So at a certain point within your animation, or you could say, once this object reaches the end of its motion path, for instance, pause the timeline, and then have the user do something to start the timeline back up again. Okay, absolutely. I wonder where my navigation goes from here. previous? No, it wasn't previous. Now actually you brought to mind another really cool thing in here, which is that little fella down there. That's another new feature in Storyline 2, is you can actually change the state of your next or previous buttons so that they either are hidden, and you don't see them at all, or in this case, they're disabled. Okay? So physically, I can't click on the button. You could have done it previously in Storyline 1 by attaching conditions to the trigger that moves you backwards and forwards, but now you can actually change the state of that button, so they're either not there, or they're just completely disabled when you go through. What did I do with that thing? It's going to annoy me. Aha, that was the one. Okay, so what we also have in, alright, so also what we have in the triggers in here, we also now have triggers that when the timeline reaches a specific point, you can have something happen as well, okay? You can also have triggers that are based on when an animation completes, and then obviously with the sliders you can have a trigger when the slider moves and what happens around those different elements. You can also see now that we have the next button turned back on, and the next button in this instance has been turned back on because something has happened on the screen. So we've gone past that the thing in Storyline 1 where you would have to have a variable that turns the button off, something that changes the variable, so they're true and false variables like Ruth was showing earlier on. It starts off as false when the video completes on the slide. Variable changes to true and allows the user to move on. What you can actually do now is turn the next button off with a change of state trigger and then turn it back on again automatically when the video completes or when the timeline finishes or when something else happens on the screen, which is very cool. Okay. So those are the new features that I was going to show you.